So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome on my behalf on the afternoon session in our Eurooppa-forum's Economic Day. My name is Niko Kyynäräinen. I'm the Business Development Director here in Turku Business Region and the CEO of Turku Science Park Limited. This is one of the most dynamic and actively growing business area in the whole Finland, and of course for our companies, the future of European Union, the growth strategies that will be made in Europe are very, very important. The international trade for our companies is of course the success that we try to hang on and be actively involved. I hope that this will be an interactive afternoon. We have a Eurooppa-forum's app where you can write down your opinions. We have a wall that says and shows what you have written. I have also a potential to look myself, and when I'm moderating, I can ask questions from our keynote speakers if you have a good points and good questions put out there. First of all, we are very proud and happy that the opening speech will be held by the Minister of Economic Affairs, Ms. Kulmuni, who will be addressing some words of the European Union development and some economic development that is going on in Finland. So please, Minister Kulmuni, the floor is yours.
So, dear friends, mic is on. Dear friends, dear political and business leaders, thank you for the invitation. Great to be here. I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to participate for the Turku Eurooppa-forum's Economic Day today. And of course, active discussion about the future development of the internal market, competitiveness and innovation is urgently needed to promote future policy actions that match future needs. So I will be concentrating in my words 3 themes: internal market, competitiveness and innovation. And of course everything is based on the European level. Few words from the Finnish perspective, but I concentrate for the theme of today, European policies. Of course, as a nation state, Finland has set an ambitious objective that the EU would become the most competitive and socially inclusive climate-neutral economy globally. So the level of ambitiousness is high, I'd say. Our aim is that during Finland's presidency, during the chairmanship of the EU presidency, the EU institutions, member states, and all of us together as European decision makers could achieve a joint vision of a new growth agenda for the EU, and I will be returning to the growth agenda a few times. Why does the EU need then a new design for sustainable growth? We in Europe are facing some severe and serious global challenges. Firstly, climate change requires rapid action on global scale. Secondly, very rapid technological developments are changing our lives, for example through digitalization, automatization and artificial intelligence. Thirdly, global competition is fierce and requires the EU to step forward as a strong global actor. Therefore, we urgently need a move towards an economically, socially and environmentally sustainable economy. Nothing more and nothing less. And I'd say it is really essential that we adopt an integrated approach to the internal market, digital economy, industrial and innovation policies, and Europe's external competitiveness. I will next go through the 5 key elements in the new design for sustainable growth. We've been talking and pulling forward to create sustainable growth in the EU during the next 5 years. So what do we need then? First, an effective EU single market. Secondly, a transition towards a climate-neutral economy. Thirdly, a modern industrial policy driven by a digital economy with a strong focus on research and innovation. Fourthly, new skills and continuous learning. And fifthly, an active trade policy as an external dimension of EU competitiveness. Finland's presidency sees that to create sustainable growth agenda in the EU, we need those 5 elements I just mentioned. As the Finnish presidency, the implementation of the future growth agenda should become a core task also for the new Commission. So the transition moment when the new Commission is only to be built is really attractive for Finland, likewise to be shaping the future work list for the Commission. In the agenda, holistic policy measures need to be ambitious and at the same time also realistic, possible to fulfill. I'd like to talk more in detail about the first 3 elements I mentioned that will create the policy framework for the new growth agenda, as mentioned. Starting from the point 1, single market is one of Europe's biggest achievements, I dare to say. The single market offers businesses, consumers and citizens a direct and concrete way of benefiting from the EU. For Finland, as a small member state of the outskirts of Europe, the EU market with more than 5 million citizens and the free movement of goods, services and employees has opened really a tremendous business opportunities. You don't have just the one market of your country, you have the market of the 28 countries, so it's a huge business opportunities for our small and medium-sized businesses. Smart and forward-looking single market policies are vital for the competitiveness of Europe to have a scalable single market. The focus should be on strengthening services, particularly I'd say digital services, as an integral part of the single market. To benefit even more from the single market, we need to build a stronger single market, as mentioned, and seize any unused opportunities and remove any remaining barriers. And this I really mean to be ambitious as well. It's a huge, huge opportunity for whole of Europe. During Finland's presidency, we have a crucial role, of course, to play in determining the future of the single market. The June European Council actually adopted the 5-year strategic agenda for the European Union for the period 2019 to 2024 to guide the work of EU institutions. One of the 4 priorities of the agenda is developing a strong and vibrant economic base. And that includes, of course, the internal market, industrial policy, and the digital economy that I will be going through in my speech as well. Secondly, if the effective EU single market is the core number 1, the second point is the element of the sustainable growth agenda will be the transition towards a climate-neutral society. Tackling climate change is not only a must, but it is also an economic opportunity. I have no doubt about that. Research and innovation play an important role as key drivers to turn those opportunities towards sustainable economic growth. Of course, we want to take the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement goals, and as well as Finland's own climate targets as an opportunity for industrial welfare. The aim is, and the only task there is related on my agenda, of course, is to tackle the climate change and at the same time to keep our industrial workplaces here and create them many, many more. By setting ambitious goals, by supporting research and development, and by striving to create a level playing field for businesses, Finland and the EU are encouraging businesses to seek climate-neutral and resource-wise solutions. And I'd say that Europe can definitely be best in it. Our emphasis needs to be on reducing emissions both significantly and cost effectively, and at the same time boost innovation-led economic growth over the next decades. The EU should aim to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and this is something we're putting forward in our presidency programme. So, if the internal single market was the step number one, secondly, transition towards climate neutral economy, third point is a few words about modern industrial policy, including digital and data economy. I'd say we need to set the objective of Europe becoming a global leader in the digital economy. Digitalization, artificial intelligence, data and platform economy are key drivers for the EU's success in the global market. Furthermore, digital transformation should be integrated into our efforts to develop the single market at the same time. So, data will play a key role as driver of new business and services, huge market opportunity as well. Europe needs a set of policy actions related to the data economy, including data access, data sharing, use of data, reuse of data, interoperability, and of course, trust. Data policy principles are required right now because our societies are becoming more and more networked, knowledge intensive and digitalized. And in addition, it is really important that we create incentives for data sharing and joint use and make sure Europe remains an attractive investment environment for data-driven business. Indeed, we should improve data mobility both within the EU and worldwide. Moreover, related to data economy, I'd like to bring up the question of artificial intelligence likewise. Today we speak so much about artificial intelligence because, of course, AI is changing our lives tremendously. And at the same time, the AI holds the potential to improve our lives and solve the challenges that we face as European citizens. Therefore, I see that Europe must uphold ethics and trust when developing data economy and AI. There needs to be a uniquely European way to digital economy. During Finland's presidency, our objective is to promote the introduction of artificial intelligence in all sectors and to create AI-based solutions that meet the needs of society and improve competitiveness. So it's not only related to hardcore science, but it's related to the services and everyday life of our citizens to improve the well-being of Europeans. When it comes to the ethical development and use of artificial intelligence, the EU has a globally competitive edge, I dare to say. I believe that to drive innovation and new business in the European Union, we must promote both international expertise, research and development, and build ecosystems that bring together the worlds of research and business. It's really important that the EU policy and financial instruments are used to encourage innovation ecosystems and to spur growth in strategic value chains. Furthermore, ecosystems built on cutting-edge research and expertise will also attract the talent and investments the EU desperately needs. Dear participants of the Eurooppa-forum, a well-functioning single market and an effective digital economy are essential for the growth and competitiveness of Finland and Europe alike. At the same time, they go hand in hand. It is important to make sure that any EU-level measures take into account the significance of services, particularly meaning, in my speech, digital services, for Europe's growth and competitiveness. Services generate an increasingly large proportion of the value added in the manufacturing industry, and they represent more than 60% of the EU's gross domestic product. Two things still to taken into account as we begin to implement the EU industrial and innovation policy. Firstly, the majority of businesses are small or medium-sized. Secondly, successful industrial renewal depends on the labour force, which is also met here in Turku and in this region. Socially, sustainable growth can be achieved, of course, but this requires that businesses of all sizes are given the opportunity to develop their activities. Moreover, we need to ensure that the skills and competence of the workforce meet the needs of modern industry. A reliable and predictable business environment encourages new investments and creation of new jobs. It has been heard also before. And this EU-level aim is also an important goal of our Finnish presidency, naturally. The Member States and the Commission should really pay more attention to achieving consistent, effective and transparent implementation of EU single market regulation. By doing this, we can create a genuine single market that covers the entire EU. In a rapidly changing digital environment, it is particularly important to ensure that regulation provides opportunities for new businesses. I had the opportunity to be hosting the informal meeting of the ministers responsible for competitiveness in Helsinki in the beginning of July, 4th and 5th of July, and it provided the first opportunity to share ideas on the priorities of the work programme of the next Commission, likewise. Ministers welcomed the comprehensive approach to sustainable growth, and we look forward to continuing the work on the Sustainable Growth Agenda at the forthcoming ministerial councils in September and November. At the ministerial level, we focus on the holistic approach to single market, digital economy, industrial policy, and research and innovation to create a new sustainable growth agenda for the EU. And the guidelines for the next 5 years of the Commission's next president, Ursula von der Leyen, were published in July, as known, and these guidelines contain the same targets as the Agenda for Sustainable Growth, which we are very pleased, of course, which Finland is advancing during its presidency, naturally. According to von der Leyen, industrial policy and the achievement of climate targets go hand in hand. And I'd say all of my colleagues all around Europe are working hard for the European industry, for the businesses, and for the new business opportunities that generate the well-being we have the opportunity to be sharing. Similarly, the digital economy is closely linked to the development of products and services. Small and medium-sized enterprises have been instrumental in promoting sustainable growth. It is important that the EU institutions and member states share the same views. Only by agreeing on key policies can we commit to the implementation of measures that will secure the future of the European Union. So, dear political and business leaders, to conclude my remarks, economic growth is needed. It's the base for all of the well-being in Finland, all around Europe, and at the same time, economic growth must be environmentally and socially sustainable. That is the key, and that's why Finland is talking about sustainable growth agenda. While we want to have growth, we need economic growth, and it must be created with socially and economical modern way. A new design for growth is necessary for the single market. It's necessary for transition towards the climate-neutral society, and it's necessary for industrial policy and for innovation and for the research in the whole of European Union. And I'd say, let us set this goal together, because it's only the way of creating more hope and ambition and the fierce task to work hard on it is required on that. So, we need to foster competitive and socially inclusive EU to live up to the expectations of the European businesses and citizens. So the level is relatively high, where you have the whole of support of Europe on your back. I hope that in nearly 6 months, in New Year's Eve, then we will have a sustainable growth agenda on European level for the EU for the next 5 years. So we have almost 6 months to run on that, and we'll be working hard to fulfill it. Thank you very much for the possibility to participate for your forum, and then I will be gladly hearing the comments on my remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Minister Kulmuni, for very, very interesting notes. Now it's also a possibility to ask or comment from the audience if you have some remarks or notes you have made during the minister's notes. So please, we will have microphones here if somebody likes to address something. Please.
Thank you. I'm Almeida Freire. I'm from the ESC, and I come from Portugal. Just a simple question to the minister. Did you had the opportunity to discuss this agenda with the new president of the Commission?
Minister, you can answer right away, please.
Well, thank you for the question. I must admit that personally, I didn't have the opportunity to talk with the new president of the Commission with the growth agenda, but we're very pleased that the work had been done already before the new Finnish government was established, while the Commission proposal was really looked somewhat similar for the ideas that we'd been pulling forward in our presidency program. But no doubt that hopefully the Prime Minister has taken this on the agenda, but I personally didn't have the opportunity. But the ideas are somewhat well coordinated on that side, that we're really hopeful that the talks and ideas and the program we're dealing with for the next 6 months will then end up also for the Commission program.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much, and I'm also from the ESC, from Poland. I'd like just to make a short comment to your intervention, Madam Minister. I think it's extremely important that the presidency has taken this, I would say, holistic approach to quite complex dossiers like single market or sustainable development, but indeed they are very complex. But I think if we don't tackle them in a comprehensive way, as you try to make in your priorities, I think we are missing a major point. For instance, in our committee as employers group, and there are 40 people here from all the member states in this room today, and anyway, thank you for the invitation to the Turku authorities and the colleagues here from Finland. We are trying to make this more and more on the agenda, that sustainability, economic growth, the kind of inclusive society, they are not in contradiction. They are part of the same equation. And I think to approach these in a comprehensive and a long-term perspective is something that has a lot of value. And when I had the privilege to listen to your Prime Minister, at the day of his nomination, he emphasized that also, that this comprehensive long-term strategy for the sustainable growth is a heart of the presidency, I would say, proposal. Please keep on trying. It won't be easy. You know, we know what we are saying, but it's certainly a very correct one. Thank you very much, Madam.
Please, Minister, if you want to comment.
Well, nothing more than I agree, and thank you for the support. But while taking care of the economic affairs, of course, themes related to continuous learning, for example, are not only all the combat against climate change. They are not only themes related to my ministry, the themes I work for industry, for businesses, for small and medium-sized corporations. Of course, they are dealt with my colleagues as well. but to really tackle these issues, to really tackle the problem for the labor workforce we currently and desperately need in this region, for example, or to tackle the big question related to how working life is changing. So of course these all needs to be filled up somehow and related to debate about climate change, where there is so much desperate in it and so much misery in it. So of course it's a huge it's a huge challenge for whole of the globe. But if EU can really bring on the solutions and really to tackle the question on that sense that we make our industry to keep here and at the same time answering for the renewable of the industry. So it's a huge opportunity at the same time, although it's a huge challenge in this sense. But I've no doubt that when we have the holistic approach on themes, we have a better solutions on those, and that's altogether the part of the society. You can't really just take one part out of it, but you need to always think it really on a holistic approach.
Okay, there. One more.
Thank you. András Adolényi, ESC from Hungary. Two short questions. You analyze the need of developing the internal or the single market from mostly an internal context. There is another context, which is the external environment. How do you comment on the need of developing the single market from this external context point of view? You know, protectionism, Brexit, etc., etc. Second question, to elaborate a little bit more about the comments of my dear colleague Jacek. A question from the crossroads of economic development and social progress. How would you evaluate, just very shortly, the experiments in Finland about the guaranteed income scheme? Guaranteed personal income scheme experience. Is it not clear?
Yeah, basic income experience, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, please.
Yeah, thank you for the good questions. That's true. I concentrate mainly on internal single market as a representative of a small nation state and a small EU member country. Of course, the market of Finland or the market of the Nordic countries is not really enough. So to really have a decent home market of 500 million citizens, it starts to be a good baseline then to lift off for the global level. I'm concerned for the external development, no doubt. I'm concerned about the style, how China is working, and of course I'm really concerned about the tone of voice we've heard from the United States, and still, during the last decades, the tremendous rise in well-being and opportunities and the growth for our businesses has been possible mainly because of the idea of really working single market. And if it doesn't develop then on global level, there's no doubt that from a small nation state, from a small member country perspective, the protectionism would never be the answer. It's really problematic, and we don't have the opportunities as a one to participate on that level of discussion, but we really need to have the whole of EU participating on that level of discussion. And if we can find the atmosphere or the way of answering, for example, climate change has been somewhat different in these two examples I mentioned. If Europe can find really the new growth for the current situation, if we can find the new growth, how to tackle climate change and at the same time to the transition towards a climate neutral society, no doubt that it will bring also a lot of new growth, new possibilities for our industries. And hopefully we'll also have the possibility to develop, because that's the only way I really see to put forward that we have many-sided discussion and contract-based global market. There's no doubt that from a small member states perspective, it is concerning and nervousing while protectionism is rising. And I think EU should fight back on that and fight against it. Then a few words about the experiences for the basic income experience the previous government done. The analysis is still on the progress. I'd say there hasn't really been on a nation level too many experiences done globally. What has been done are also very, very interesting, and there is also ideas to continue the experiences and do the second step of the basic income experience. And of course, at the same time, the governmental programs include a large parliamentarian cohesion on that how to diminish the bureaucracy in the Finnish social security system. One of the results we have now from the experience is that the level of bureaucracy diminished. The level of bureaucracy and the pressure people felt for the bureaucracy minimized, and they had the opportunity to always take even the small size of the work. If it lasts for 2 hours or 2 days or 2 weeks, it was fruitful. They got more money on their pocket than for the state. So the clarification of the bureaucracy and simplification of the bureaucracy was definitely a key result at this point for the results of the basic income experience. But the actual results they are only coming, and the current government, although the political coalition changed a bit, are likewise doing a social security experience, and hopefully the results that we found from the first experience will be then used also in the second phase of the next experience. So thank you for my size, and then I give it to you.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. We will move on a little bit next. So we have also a comment speech. In the morning, we had a very interesting session of the single market held by Mr. Taneli Lahti, and Taneli said that the Business Europe's kind of idea for the coming Commission paper will be so that do less, not so high visions, but do your work and proceed with those decisions that have already been made. Now we have a kind of a direct eyesight of these things, how the papers are written already. So Mr. Joki, the head of cabinet in European Commissions, will be making us a comment speech and really looking into the coming Commission's papers. Please, Risto.
Yeah, it's my picture. Thank you, Madam Minister. Thanks for your excellent speech, and for all the members of Economic and Social Committee. Welcome to Finland. As a former deputy or vice member of Economic and Social Committee, I was in that position 25 years. I have plenty of sympathy for Economic and Social Committee, which is a vital stakeholder of the European system, and all the Finnish members in the Economic and Social Committee have been very active during the past 25 years, and your presence here is actually a clear sign of the activity and deep European, let's say, commitment to European work of the Finnish members, and of course you are also committed because you are here. Thank you also for the organizers of this session and the whole Turku Eurooppa-forum. This is the second time this kind of setup is being organized, and we in the Commission find it extremely important that there is a dedicated session where EU topics can be discussed from different perspectives and which are open for public and where people can come and meet the MEPs or commissioners. This time Vice President Katainen, my boss, will be here tomorrow and go on this discussion. Now, before going what happens in the future, perhaps some words what has been done so far during the last 5 years. As we always tend to think about the future, and occasionally we have to also have a look what has been achieved during the last years, because of course on that we are building the future. So during the last 5 years, EU economy has been growing, unemployment levels are record low at the moment, employment levels record high. There has been 12 million new jobs created in the EU, investments have taken up. So plenty of things have been happening. And also EU is more integrated now than it was 5 years ago. It has happened without any treaty changes. Every piece of legislation which in a way is affecting all the member states, having impact on the internal market, for example, actually integrates the EU further. And this commission has made around 470 proposals. A bit more than 350 of them has been adopted or agreed between the co-legislators, European Parliament and Council, and of course ECOSOC has had. You have had your say on those proposals, and those ones they are implemented will once again make Europe more integrated. And there are good examples, for example, digital side, which has been achieved. Roaming, of course, is the most well-known, but the geo-blocking, abolishing it for certain services and many other things like that have been achieved. But yes, there is plenty of things to do and plenty of things we have to take into account. The world is different from what it used to be 5 years ago. There are new challenges which we have to address, the global challenge, the internal challenge, and many others. Now, what we've been advocating and what Vice President Katainen has been advocating for the future, and which Commission also has been speaking about, which member states have been speaking about, is one topic which was already mentioned in one of the questions, is the global dimension, the global competition. So how to address the new uncertain world reality which we are facing in US, in China, elsewhere, how to address the occasionally unfair competition which we are facing. Competition is by definition good, but if a third country uses state subsidies to buy prominent good European companies and has in a way endless amount of money to buy some digital companies in the EU, so how can the EU then develop those companies? Other one is, of course, for the global dimension, and it goes to the further topics, is that, well, I'll come later to it. Then part of the global dimension is also trade. How to, in a way, ensure that world trade, which EU is dependent, is functioning fluently. And in that area, of course, progress has been done. We've concluded, agreed, and now it's implemented the trade agreement with Japan. We've made progress with Mexico, lately Mercosur, Vietnam, Singapore. They are all vital because not only they allow the businesses to trade more fluently, they also actually export our standards to those countries more and more. So being a global standard setter has to be, in a way, one thing which we concentrate. Then, so global challenge, how to address that one. Then second one, which has been reflected also, and needs to be reflected, was mentioned by Taneli Lahti earlier today, also vice member of the Economic and Social Committee, by the way, so earlier nowadays. So are the existing trade barriers, be they abroad or in the EU, and then there are different kind of reasons which are bringing them. Member states have a habit of adding up, gold plating some of the EU legislation. Latest example is the data protection legislation, where member states been adding their own things, which makes it difficult for the companies to operate. About 10 years when I was working for Olli Rehn in his cabinet, we were trying to harmonize the EU consumer legislation a little bit more. And my conclusion of that exercise was that we have 28 Europe's best consumer legislations which shouldn't be changed. And that's of course, all that kind of small details are barriers. And the barriers are, I mean, in the past, barriers used to be there, let's say, I hope nobody will be offended, but for example, at the springtime at the Spanish and French border, when Spanish strawberries were entering French market, there used to be some demonstration. Those are more or less past nowadays. And the barriers which we are nowadays are having, they are more invisible, more difficult to address. They are these gold-plating barriers. They are slow implementation of the legislation. They are minor differences in the implementation legislation. And of course, it's the consumers, citizens, and businesses who suffer, and especially SMEs. A small company cannot be aware of all the barriers. Then what we have to do is concentrate on those ones. Then we have to address the challenges which already Minister mentioned, artificial intelligence, of course, how to address that one, and it's linked to many sectors. I mean, just today the defense ministers are meeting, having their informal meeting, and they are discussing artificial intelligence and defense, how to work with that one, and of course that's one sector, but there are also many others. But at the same time, I mean, there is plenty of potential in the EU because there is plenty of reliable data, which should be used, could be used, but of course we must have the trust of the citizens and the data protection systems there, and use the data in a smart manner. Then fourth point, which having listened carefully, Minister, which she didn't mention, but which Finland is mentioning quite often, is the rule of law. And it's closely linked to the internal market and development of the internal market. Internal market is about trust. How do we trust the legal systems and the administration in different countries? Do we trust that they treat all the companies, all the actors equally? And if we lose that trust, some of them, as you are, many of you are business representatives, you start having doubts on investments, even if it would make sense to investment somewhere. And gradually that's a spiral which destroys the internal market. We have to be able to trust each other, our legal systems, our court systems, and our public procurement system, because that's a core of the internal market. And I just want to underline that, and my boss, Vice President Katainen, is keeping that, has said it several times. Now, what's happening next? Well, what this commission is still preparing is this long-term vision for the industry and single markets. And in preparing that, we've been in close contact with member states, stakeholders, business, with civil society in general. And in this occasion, I have to thank Finnish presidency for the, let's say, firstly, very good preparation for the presidency. The Finnish civil servants have been very active engaging with the Commission, reflecting what to do during the presidency, what Commission will do. They've been giving us plenty of ideas, plenty of good non-papers. And what Minister said about Green Growth Agenda, actually it's a good paper, well-written ideas, and now it's in a way well prepared in different committees and different council formations, so that in a way it contributes to the future of the EU. And we fully share the idea of having a holistic approach. Now, Commission has certain tendency to the silos. In this Commission, there was the Vice President system was created in order to bring more coherence between the different directorates. And for example, Vice President Katainen has been in charge of, let's say, sectors which 9 commissioners are covering, and in a way bringing them closer together. And that's a process which, of course, future President-elect Ursula von der Leyen is now reflecting what kind of structure she will establish for the next commission. And it appears that there is at least certain keenness of keeping similar system, because I mean digital single market services and normal goods, they are just part of the same thing. I mean, mobile phone services, it's a object of thing. It's something physical, but it's also very digital, and it's plenty of services. So they have to be looked at the same time, at the same table holistically, so that we don't create obstacles between our legislation. Now, and fully agree what was said for the Taneli had said earlier, that we have to look also that the existing legislation and coming legislation are in a way in line with each other, and they are fit for the purposes. Now for the future, this commission paper, commission strategy is being prepared. Now what idea still is that it would come out during this commission time, but that's totally up to the president-elect whether she wants this commission to deliver some ideas, some strategies on the single market and industrial policy. And currently what is happening is that we are reflecting how the, let's say, political guidelines of President-elect Ursula von der Leyen will be in a way incorporated, or what kind of impact they have with this one and how they are combined. And what future commission will do will be decided by the future commission. So this commission doesn't have any role in that one. And the agenda of the future commission it's in a way published. It's the political guidelines of the president-elect. And as Minister said, it's in line with the ideas they are Finnish presidency is also in having, and also in line of the thinking which current commission is having. So green growth. Of course, it's very, how would I say, in her speech, Ursula von der Leyen, she gave clear things to deliver. First one, of course, is the climate dimension. Our current objective is 40% by 2030 CO2 reduction. In reality, the agreed measures will bring us to 44%, and then, okay, thank you. And then how to in a way go to 50 or 55 as he indicated. And as you know, you are all experts, so either we touch the ETS side or non-ETS side or both of them, which of course is requires some legislation. She also indicated that the different systems they have to converge from 2030 onwards. So discussing what is the system for the CO2 reduction from 2030 onwards is still in a way on her table. Then she clearly indicated that there will be new measures like carbon border tax. She has stated that one, that's being prepared. Then there are plenty of elements to bring Europe more sustainable, and they are actually clearly linked to the internal market. For example, she has indicated that there will be this kind of sustainable food production strategy. And that's one sector where actually the current legislation allows member states to build up certain barriers, either via labeling or via other means, and of course they are totally legal and justified and approved by the Commission. But at the same time, all the barriers national administration end up creating in whatever sector are actually gradually destroying single market. So it provides an opportunity in several sectors also to have a look at the existing system and whether it actually gives too much freedom for national policy making and gradually destroys what we have built so far. Then also strong commitment on biodiversity, zero pollution, and circular economy, which I said was one of the mega trends. Now, that one I would like to say some words. It's this single plastic proposal we did, which was adopted by the co-legislators. So we are now being followed by other countries. Most recently, India announced that they will be actually banning more or less the same products as EU had done. So it's kind of creating global market for waste and creating global standards for waste. And that has to be done also inside of the EU. What we've been hearing, for example, Finnish companies in northern Finland, which are in a way active in circular economy. So they are saying that actually the Swedish border makes it impossible to trade in some cases certain products which should be tradable. So there is plenty of things we can do and we should do. So this is in a way where we are with the preparations, but what the next commission will do, it's up to the next commission. But as said, those are the elements which seem to be on the table. And of course, for the Finnish presidency, wish from the Commission side that MFF proposal, the next budget guidelines for the next 7 years should be adopted as soon as possible, because the worst thing for businesses is uncertainty. And the first thing which there is for innovation is uncertainty. And the bigger we have all the legislation and figures in place, the faster, for example, universities, rector of the University of Turku is here, Jukka Kola, so they can plan their activities and how to, in a way, build better Europe together with other universities and make Europe more competitive. So this was more or less what I had to say. I probably would have something else in my long speech, but that one I forgot. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Risto, for many interesting topics. Before I give the floor to the audience, I would like to ask, you mentioned quite often the policy guidelines that the president has made. What is your opinion when looking inside the cabinet? Are there too much?
There is plenty, and she has promised to deliver plenty of those ones in 100 days. And it's balanced package. I mean, we cannot be building Europe which is just about business. We have to remember the citizens and the social dimension of the Europe also. And therefore, while there are these, let's say, measures which are for internal market, for industry, digital single market, there has to be also measures for balancing to be adjusting to the change. For example, this adjustment fund, adjustment fund, which she's in a way thinking is that if which we have to do is in a way get rid of coal and other fossil fuels. So of course there are regions which will be suffering, and we have to be able to help those regions, and therefore that kind of things are needed, because how I have seen always personally that EU has to do has to move ahead. When we are moving ahead, when we are having new trade agreements or changing from fossil fuel to renewables, there are areas who will be less better off for a while. And we have to be able to help them, because otherwise we don't have any progress. EU must care.
Thank you. Now, please.
I think your last comment, sorry, Brendan Burns from the United Kingdom, well, actually from Scotland, so I better start defining that one.
Okay.
Your last comment is probably the one that always sort of gets to me. Yes, we have to have a different understanding that Europe is not just businesses. We also need an understanding that business isn't just businesses. We have a section, the micro and small business sector. Let's be honest, 250 employees, 5 million turnover, a small business. You know, we've been talking about this for 10 years, that the definition for small businesses is wrong. It was right when it was defined first, but we've brought in more technology. I mean, my own business, I always use an example. I used to employ over 100 staff. I now employ 6 and do, I don't know how much more than we used to do. So at what point is the European Commission going to grasp this and realise, or at least at what point is anybody in Brussels going to realise that to help small businesses, we've really got to redefine what we mean. And the present definition is just no use.
Well, I'm fully aware that the definition has been there for a long time, and I would say it requires certain updating. And of course, it's, let's say, up for the stakeholders to come and discuss with the Commission and in a way have a clear look at that one. And now when there will be a new Commission, new commissioners, so they will be actually looking what to do in their sector, and they will be facing these questions in parliamentary hearings in other systems. And the let's say the better case, the more united case the sector makes, the more likely it is to go ahead. For example, this kind of definitions, okay, they've been there, but they can be changed when there is political will. I don't think they are carved to any stone.
Please, more. Jukka.
Thank you, Risto, for a very good speech and good points there. But then, actually, you didn't mention very much about innovation and still, well, enhancing and advancing innovation in Europe has been one of the major goals for Vice Chairman Katainen and his cabinet, and for you as a head of the cabinet. So, but it's not only about innovation, like you said, and then also the gentleman from Scotland said. So it's not only this kind of business type of access. So there are different type of innovations. That would be another area to talk. But then, seeing the connection between innovation and research, and well, we have been talking sometimes too, and I have visited Brussels so many times, and then when we are now prepared, or actually prepared Horizon Europe, and then there's European Innovation Council, that's on Katainen's side, but then there's a research side, and then there are different people talking about that. EIT is already there. So how do you see, how successful, well, you have been there in sort of connecting better research and innovation ecosystem construction as a whole to make Europe more competitive, because we are still lagging behind, for example, United States or some other even Asian countries are not there. So that kind of small question, how successful you have been? Thank you.
Personally, of Commission, so. No, I mean, for the innovation first, before answering to your question, so one point I didn't remember to mention is that actually we do have plenty of innovations in the EU. Was it 10 years ago, I met one lobbyist at the IT company, and he was listing all the innovations which were done in Europe. But they were all capitalized in US. And why? Because we were lacking at that time the internal market, and we are still lacking it. For SME, it's easier to innovate when you have the innovations. It's easier for you to cash 10, 20 millions and sell it to whatever third, no names. So to whatever company, because then you are at least certain. If you start in a way then invading the, let's say, internal market or go into the internal market, it's difficult because then there are still quite a bit of different regimes here and there, and that's what we have to work on. Then the fragmentation between, in a way, let's say, different forums in the innovation, it's in a way correct. It has to do also with the administrative structure of the member states. Now, German Minister for Economy, Mr. Altmaier, I was listening him once for a speech, and he actually said that it's difficult for him to have kind of a collegial approach with the other ministers, because he has 27 times 4 colleagues, because one is doing research and one is doing this and that, and it's In a way, same in Finland when there is a competitiveness council, there is so many representatives. So it's in a way how to bring those firstly together at the national level. The Finnish system is actually relatively good because there is good EU coordination and good internal coordination and so on, and of course similar systems other member states. But still, in a way, there isn't any kind of finance ministers are kind of a club. Agricultural ministers are kind of a club. Prime ministers are kind of a club. They meet once a month, more or less, all of them. But the people who are in charge of the innovation and internal market and the competitiveness council, it's a little bit too large group. And I don't have any answer for that one, how to settle it. But yes, there is things to be done.
Please.
Jan von Gehrig from Nordea. The Commission has had one of the priorities has been building a capital markets union. Can you give us status on where we are on that? How high on the agenda of the next Commission might that be, and what are the biggest stumbling blocks? Thanks.
Well, in that sector, significant progress has been made, but we are not yet there. And in President-elect's speech, he was clear, highlighting the importance of the capital market union for the SMEs, for example, and she made a clear commitment that it has to, in a way, we have to make further progress on that one. It's quite, how would I say, complicated and sensitive area also all this, let's say, financial markets, European capital markets. So, but yes, there is a commitment to go ahead further.
Yes, if the floor is not open anymore, then we thank Mr. Joki for comments and discussion. The discussion is not ended yet, of course. Next, it will continue on a coffee break, so half an hour coffee break. Please discuss of the themes that we have already been handling today, and then we start with the panel discussion 2:45 and go onwards. Please be active also on the wall, so we have questions and comments there, and use the Eurooppa-foorum's app that we have for you only prepared. Thank you for this session. Thank you, Risto, and continue soon. Continue our afternoon sessions, and like I promised, the discussion will go on, and the next phase will be a panel discussion on the topic, what kind of internal market does Europe need? I will give the floor to a friend of mine, Mr. Romakkaniemi, who was, for example, the head of cabinet before Mr. Joki, and now the CEO of Chamber of Commerce in Finland, and has a deep understanding how the EU works and how the business life in Finland works. So, Juho, please, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nico. Thank you, and I hope that we are going to have a really, really interesting panel discussion and session here in the afternoon. First of all, I have to say a few words about the economic situation and the challenges of the next Commission mandate, because we are approaching and actually in the middle of the times where the protectionism is rising, the trade barriers are threatening the free trade in the world, and the EU is suddenly the beacon of light for the free trade, open trade, and multilateral cooperation in the world. EU is by definition something that we want the world to be in the future. We have interesting panelists here to discuss today about the single market and what the EU has to offer to businesses, to trade, to commerce, and economic development of Europe. Let me invite the dear panelists one by one. First, please welcome Jussi Koskinen. Jussi is from Nordea, which is the top 10 financial company in Europe and the biggest in the Nordics. Then we have Mr. Veli-Matti Mattila. Please, he is the CEO of Elisa, which is the biggest telecom company in Finland, telecom, technology, media, and much more. Then we have Mrs. Sara-Sofia Sirén, please, a member of parliament from coalition party, EPP party here in Finland. Welcome. And then Mr. Ville Niinistö, member of the European Parliament for the Greens. Welcome to the stage. And last but not least, Mrs. Mia-Petra Kumpula-Natri, please welcome to the stage. Mia-Petra is the second term member of the European Parliament for the S&D group. So, let's have a little warm-up round here. And I will ask you, in general, the businesses see, of course, the single market, internal market, and the trade policy, the strengths of the European Union. But how do you see the internal market of the European Union functioning and working at the moment? Is it something that we can build on? Perhaps, Jussi, you can start.
I think it's a great start back in the history, but lately I've at least observed a deterioration day by day. So I'm making a claim that it doesn't work. We have some issues. We have to solve them.
Okay, and let's discuss about those issues later in the panel. What about Mr. Mattila? How do you see the situation in the internal market, and where are we heading at?
I think the single market has been creating results for businesses and also people in Europe, which has been a very nice and good progress in the years. But unfortunately, I have to agree with the previous that we see now deterioration on the development in many respects, and that's very alarming, and there is something to do. But a lot of opportunity, of course, exists with the single market progress.
Thank you. What about Mrs. Siren? How do you see the situation in the internal market and what should be developed further?
Well, I think it's safe to say that the single market is one of the greatest achievements of the EU so far. The free movement of people and products and services and capital creates great benefits for the people that live in Finland and within the EU. But of course we need to develop this system and go even deeper into the single market to have more benefits. I understand that there are big questions regarding digital services, for example, or in general the single market for services. And I think a good rule of thumb is that we don't need more regulation, but we just need to have simple and functional regulation.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Niinistö, you have been involved in EU decision making as a minister in the council previously. Now you are fresh and starting member of the European Parliament. How does the perspective change when you change the institution, and how do you see the development of the internal market?
Well, I try to be one of those politicians whose values don't change according to the position. so I'm trying to continue with the same policies. But I would say that the single market and the internal market has been one of the EU's greatest successes. But there are kind of like two-folded challenges to that in the current world. One is the rise of populism and patriotism or nationalism, in the sense that even within the EU there are new kind of interpretations nationally that limits the use of single market, and state aid is becoming more and more discussed within industrial policy in France and in Germany when it comes to certain sectors of the economy. Smaller countries like Finland never can, have higher amounts of state aid than big countries, so it would be in our interest to make sure that the market is as free as possible. So this is one side of challenges. Still, I would say that our situation today, when we look at the world, is relatively good. I mean, there are challenges, but all internal markets, wherever in the world, they have their issues. Even the US federal market has its issues, and it seems that they are moving towards a new kind of protectionism, which is we haven't seen a protectionist right in Western democracies for 70 years, so that's something new. And I would like to add also the other challenge is that even though I'm a proponent of free trade, that trade has to be regulated in a sustainable fashion. So the environmental regulation, health regulation, and human rights regulations issues are becoming more and more important, in the sense that we don't address climate change if we don't have good regulation when it comes to environmental regulation in the market. So this has to be addressed as well.
Thank you. And then, Mrs. Kumpula-Natri, you were really active during the previous mandate, the Parliament mandate on digital single market, and also rapporteur. How do you see it? Was it a huge leap for the digital single market, or is there still a lot to do?
Yeah, if you look at the numbers of the regulation and some achievements, people know this in their everyday life. Welcome to Finland visitors without roaming fees, for example, is like a concrete that Europeans might realize that there is something that we do for them. I want to elaborate a little bit of the threats for the internal markets, that it is the populism that doesn't want to continue building up the Europe that is strong together. And for me, I also want to try to talk my second mandate even more with the language that I can talk to everyone, not only for the professionals as many of you are. And then I must remind that if we remain together, and now this figure holds the UK inside, we are 22% of the global economy. But if we split apart this market, we do have much less to do our value-based business. And I then also want to remind that it's not about a single market only, it's a single continent, it's a single living space for the people, and that's why we should also remind the values that we still care about the whole continent together, and then not to split it, that only business should work, only the internal market should work. We should really have this big view, big perspective for the common future as a continent, as a European Union. But then also on the economical facts, if I looked at the digital single market, why it is so important, it is that the services is 3/4 of our economy, 75%, and still we are only half of the level of the productivity compared with the US. So if we do not do anything with the help of, for example, digitalization, our competitiveness is not looking good.
Thank you very much. A very, very interesting introductory round. I want to remind you, dear audience, that we have here the possibility for you to tweet questions that I want to take from the tweet wall as well. The hashtag here to get your questions here is Eurooppa-foorumi or Eurooppa-forum. So with using that hashtag, I'm able to read your questions as well. Then anybody can answer to next questions, and let's go to the discussion. Let's look at a bit nationalistic view here in Finland as well, after blaming that somebody else has been too nationalistic lately. But let's look from the perspective of the Finns and the Finnish companies, that which have been the biggest benefits for Finland after joining the EU from the internal market perspective, and perhaps an additional question, because this has been really a priority of Finland in the EU, and now the biggest member state who has prioritized the single market and who was originally pushing for EU's single market, UK, is heading out with a quite big bang, if I should guess at the moment. How does that change the balance from the Finland's perspective? Mr. Niinistö, please.
Well, I would say that in short, the UK is not in line with us in all policies, but when it comes to kind of like an understanding of being progressive when it comes to environmental challenges, climate issues, so they have been proponents of a functioning European trade scheme. So they are very much for a progressive regulation, but then at the same time believing in free trade and having as little as red tape as possible. And I belong myself to the Greens, who think that red tape in essence is something that you should have as little as possible, but make sure that the main regulation is good for in the competitive sphere for environmental issues and sustainability issues. And that has been very much the approach of Britain, so that would be a big problem for us, them leaving. Then another big issue is the huge financial sector in the UK. What happens to all of that interlinkages if they are leaving? So I would say that the Brexit problem does pose a big problem for the single market as well, and also to the political interpretations of what we should do in our future. At the same time, there are a lot of politicians in other countries who think that we have to make up for this gap that the UK is leaving, that we probably have also a counterforce to that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other comments? Mr. Koskinen, please.
Add and say that, in my mind, single market has been critical for Finland historically, so I find it hard to believe that there would have been so much of good progress in the economy and within the industrial sector. I find it hard to believe that, for instance, Nordea would have moved to Finland to keep its headquarters here. So it's been really critical. And then as to Brexit, I still have this dream that the UK will wake up one day and ask themselves that, what did we do?
We want to believe.
And that Brexit will be cancelled. I've actually made bets based on my dream with the one latest today with one of the gentlemen in the audience. So let's see. I wouldn't wouldn't. When I talk with my friends in the UK, everybody is very puzzled, and they don't know what's going to happen. So maybe it will get cancelled.
Perhaps
After
I
all.
want to share that dream as well. Mrs. Siren, please.
Yeah, I think everyone shares this dream, and I don't think anyone is able to say what will exactly happen after Brexit is done, how it eventually is done, and what will happen afterwards. But what we can say is that the single market, in any case, is beneficial for Finland, as it is for the rest of the remaining EU member countries, for sure. The free movement of 500 million people, even without the UK, it's the world's largest internal market, right? So there are big possibilities for businesses and for consumers. The currency that we share, no customs, everyone will know that the products within the single market are regulated and safe, bank transfers work, and so forth. So, I mean, it's not up to us what will happen with Brexit. We dream and we hope and we do our thing, but with or without them, there are great possibilities within the development of our single market.
Please.
Yeah, if I put it in short, I think it's good for all the European countries, and especially for the small ones who doesn't have tens of millions of consumers, when we talk about the business language, that once you set your heart on the R&D and then innovate something, so you can expect that you have a market for 500 million users, and then that makes it possible to specialize. So as simple as that, I think that's the benefit. Whereas you can take that, yes, but we are better off with the market share of 3% as the UK is from the global markets, and then start innovate, and then start looking at the trade deals, whether you can start selling something progressively new. And then I hope that this even would strengthen the capacity of the European Union to work together for the innovations to be happening on our continent, on this internal market for our people, and then not to be only part of the using the innovations done somewhere else, like California, and then use the gadget from Asia and then to be the user. Whereas we should create the ecosystems with the strengthening our common R&D systems and financing. And then on that sense, sometimes I think that Europeans, we should think as nationalistic, but the European-wide.
Very good. Then Mr. Matti,
Yeah,
please.
very much repeating what's said already, but of course the single market has been beneficial for Finns and Finnish companies, Finnish businesses to have a larger single market with a more standardized way to do business in a larger market than we have in our own country. And for example, in our industry, the roaming changes, as painful as they sometimes first are for operators to lower the prices, regulated, but we create, however, more usage and more benefits to the users, which of course then long-term pays benefit for us operators as well. And also like to take the opportunity to thank Mia Petra for great work for working with this last round of roaming changes, because the best model to sell mobile data unlimited was kind of made possible to continue with the roaming change that we have had in Finland, so that the other countries that are and operators that are now following the suit to provide unlimited mobile data wouldn't have been possible without great implementation of the last roaming change, and that's of course benefit for the users, that there's no worry for bill shocks or something like that when you use mobile data. So that has been a beneficial thing, of course, for Finns, and I think for the whole Europe.
Of course, there was a point made on the tweet wall that about the Finnish EU presidency. Now the Commission president-elect is at the moment forming her program for next 5 years. Is the EU presidency something that we can use as a Finns to have an impact on the agenda of the Commission? Mr. Niinistö, you can perhaps answer to this one.
Yeah, sure. Definitely, I mean, EU presidency at this time when the working program of the next commission is prepared, it's key. And the question is that whether we want to use that leverage to be active in that debate or more kind of like being mediator of that debate. That's up to the Finnish government how actively they want to do that. But I think there are a number of issues that where we could raise our profile. And you started by saying that we are, in a sense, a beacon of light in the world when it comes to free markets. And that's something we should now realize, that even though there is this kind of like power grapple between Russia and China and the US and trade wars, it's not, I mean, not all of them are in a position of strength. Especially Russia is not in a position of strength. It's more of like out of desperation that they use geopolitical power and military power to kind of like be one of the big guys at the big table. Their economy is not up to it. And even China and the US have their own weaknesses. And if Europe plays this well, we can be the area where we still have open free trade markets for the rest of the world and be a partner for the rest of the world, which is more reliable than China and the US, which is more open to innovation, and has a regulation which also promotes progressiveness when it comes to environmental issues or how products are used. And digitalization is an area where, I mean, we need also regulation to create markets. So in that sense, we have to create this feeling in Europe that we should continue with this push forward, because if there is not regulation that creates markets, we don't get the innovations at place as well. So that should be the focus of our work for the next 5 years, creating regulations that are better for the markets and create markets, and not vice versa.
Yes, thank you. And then Mrs. Siren, please.
Yeah, thank you. I want to go back a bit to what Ville was actually saying before. The deepening of the single market is very important, and of course Finland, as the chairman at the moment, will have its role in this. But I think it was very wise for Finland to emphasize the rule of law during the presidency at the moment. This is one of the core values of the EU in general, but it's also the base where the whole idea of the single market is built on. If companies or countries cannot trust that EU member states work within the rule of law principle, how can they do business? I mean, how can they make decisions on long-term investments if they cannot trust the system? So the rule of law actually is I think, the number one priority of our presidency at the moment, as the chairman at the end of the table.
I think it's kind of nice that a conservative or a center-right politician is speaking about human rights and I'm speaking about the markets as Greens. So
it tells something about us Finns here. Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's not the first time that we are in a panel together, so I think we work well as a team. Yeah, but the rule of law, I mean, it's the oikeusvaltioperiaate, which is the base of the single market. It's also the base of our presidency on the EU level at the moment.
Mr. Koskinen.
Yeah,
yes.
Financial institutions and financial services business point of view, we really echo that. So rule of law is the key foundation to any business success, and let alone the financial services sector. So we look forward to those. Be strong when you go to the big sharks of the European Union representatives, when you go there as Finns, and stay strong.
Yes, I agree. Mr. Mattila, please.
Yeah, I would still come back to the Brexit a bit. Two things that I have been missing. One is that EU should make a bit self-investment or investigation that why did Brits decide to leave. It's not only that they had bad campaigns or so. That would be very helpful to understand, because there are certainly clear reasons that Brits were willing to have in EU working better, and then we could learn. But nevertheless, saying that also, I would think that EU should move ahead I would love to have the dream shared as well, but I think that we are staying still now. We should move ahead, and if they have decided to leave, let them leave, and let's handle that. But Europe has to progress with many different things in the agenda, and I think that's the best way also to get the Brits back.
Very good. Thank you for that. Let's move a bit further to our next topic, which is trade and trade agreements. My former boss, Risto's current boss, and actually there's the third previous head of cabinet of Vice President Jyrki Katainen, Mr. Taneli Lahti here as well. He has said, Jyrki Katainen has said that the having and negotiating, agreeing modern, deep the trade agreements with global partners is actually widening the single market beyond the European borders. And as the dark shadow of protectionism is hovering over world trade at the moment, should this be one of the EU's priority to continue to make this kind of the rules-based free trade deals with willing partners globally? Mrs. Kumpula-Natri.
Yeah, I've been a member of the INTA committee now for 2 meetings or something. So no, but I really wanted to go there. I really wanted to go there I think it's not that generally known that every MEP, the member, will have a vote on every trade agreement. So it is quite democratic in the end. It's not only technical, even though it seems to be quite difficult and technical when it goes to the chapter by chapter negotiations that the Commission takes care of. But then also I really want to see that we can specialize and take care of the global rules. And that's why it's so challenging having these Twitter-based democracy or Twitter-based negotiations that everyone have to follow what Donald Trump is tweeting to know where the negotiations are. So that is not maybe that direct democracy that we are needing. But then all in all, it becomes very open for everyone that what the global geopolitical things are. So I really hope that Europe can remain strong and willing to safeguard WTO. There was a positive sign a few months ago, then it went again to the dimmer side. So of course that is the aim, that we do want to have global rules for the whatever, traffic, for passengers, for global trade as well. So for me, really, I hope Europe will be strong, but it will be like on a price on whatever, and we cannot also forget to mention the Brazil and Amazon, which is like the eco catastrophe that my school-age children are following. And that, Mom, now it's 17%. Now it's 17%. And the eco-scientists say that 20 will be the catastrophe. So, Mom, what are you doing as an EU? So we cannot do it alone, but we need this global view on many issues, and global trade agreement is there. So if we don't have a WTO, then we do the bilateral, and yes, we need to be strong, but it is a tool to make rules for protect our climate agreement, really concretely Paris. It is rules needed for the human's right, which is also the employers and employees' right, and then it's also the human rights in general. So these sustainable, as the Finnish presidency is sustainable future, so it goes well together with the EU values and language that what we will build on. It's a sustainable future for like everyone, the globe, the people, and so on.
Then Mr. Niinistö, please, and then Mrs. Sirén.
I think this is a crucial issue, and it's a difficult one as well. It's not, there are no simple answers, because as I feel it, it's kind of like the extreme right, or some of the right, and extreme left, and some of the rest of the left are against free trade for different reasons at the moment. And
it's like a horseshoe.
Yeah, and protectionism is on the rise. So the center right and center left have to try to stick together. So we have to create rules for free trade where we are actually all getting big social and environmental issues addressed as well. Because if free trade doesn't tackle these global challenges, then there is not going to be a majority support for that. So that's my background for we need to have free trade agreements between EU and the rest of the world, and we need to have good terms in those agreements. And as Greens, we've sometimes felt that some of the free trade agreements that have been in the past have been too negligent on avoidance of taxation, for example. That's an issue that where we have to be strict that the taxes are paid in a fair way, and you can't avoid taxes. Another issue is responsibility of the environment. Free trade cannot be and should not be used to push down the environmental regulation of mining, for example. There are a lot of issues, like in Brazil, that local communities are supported by the Brazilian legislation even today, and they are protecting their rights. The environmental activists and the indigenous peoples who live in Amazon are protecting the forests, and they have won a lot of fights in the Brazilian courts. So they have kept the forests, but this illegal spreading of fires is actually a way of usurping the law, and there are landowners and cattle herders and soya and meat producers who push the indigenous people out of the forest this way, and then they take the land afterwards. So it's corruption, and it's large-scale misuse of power. And if EU doesn't tackle these issues in free trade agreements, that we can't bring in soya products or meat products which have been produced in these kind of lands with these kind of methods put in use, then we have a big social responsibility and environmental responsibility of the consequences. So we have to make sure that we actually can make corporate responsibility global, and there is this responsibility legislations are very important in together with free trade agreements, and then I think we can move forward. I would like the Greens to be part of a movement where we create these kind of free trade agreements, where we tackle these issues, and where we actually create more economic well-being and take into account the social justice aspect as well. But I'm slightly worried that we don't create its majority, that some of the free trade people don't want the social and environmental issues in, and then some of the Greens turn against it. And we shouldn't fight with each other, because the extreme right and extreme left are strong enough by themselves, and that would break the whole idea of free trade if we fight between each other.
Yes. Mrs. Siren, please.
Yeah, me and Petra was talking about Twitter. I had to check my Twitter feed meanwhile, and I remember a time when we used to think that the social media would save our democracy, and now it feels more like it's destroying it, even on a daily basis. But what you were actually asking, I would agree 100%. We would need to try to achieve as many bilateral trade deals as possible. Was that Trump?
That was me.
He's everywhere. We would need to try to achieve these agreements between countries. But of course, obviously, this needs to be done without compromising the environmental and social standards.
Very good. The last mandate, the Juncker mandate, was interesting in a sense of the 5 years, because there was one priority out of 10 on the Mr. Juncker's program that was including the trade. It was about finalizing the TTIP, the big free trade agreement between EU and US. We all know how that went in the end of the day. But behind that emerged the three very, very big trade agreements, the EU-Canada, EU-Japan, and now EU-Mercosur. And you can argue really that this commission was the most successful on the trade when you look at the volumes of the opening of the markets. And it's not only the agreements, but the standards as well. The Commission and the institutions were able to tackle the balance on several controversial issues, like the investment protection and on the competence of the agreements, they falling into the EU competence and member states' competencies, and also the social and environmental standards. They were introduced in these new agreements for the first time, which is a good thing
it's
and
progress.
a good start. But isn't it a bit controversial once again that the beyond single market, the trade agreements were the second prioritized thing for the UK's EU policy, and now that the UK is heading out, the EU is gaining ground and getting successful agreements?
Well, Brexit doesn't make sense. So.
Brexit doesn't make sense. Moving forward, then I was part of the panel.
Let's disagree. It doesn't make any sense.
Everybody agrees with me. Let's come back to Europe and internal market and implementation and enforcement, because we can create regulatory standards and legislation, but the implementation of the directives and enforcement of the legislation is actually something that makes the single market happen in the end of the day. One might argue that the Commission and the EU hasn't been always very strict or fair when enforcing the single market legislation. How do you see that? And should the new Commission be a bit more strict with the member states?
Yes. Yes, it should. When we have this kind of a system, we want it to work, and it doesn't work if the member states don't follow the rules. And Finland's doing quite well with the implementation, so we have every reason to be for this. I think this is a general challenge in EU regulation. I've done a lot of work with Baltic Sea policy, with saving the Baltic Sea policy, and the challenge is the same. I mean, we have good aims, we have good strategy, we have good agreements, but the implementation is the problem.
Please, Mrs.
Yes, I think from the entrepreneur's side that once you have a good innovation and then you are prepared to have the market for 500 million consumers or 10,000 if it's something very special, and then you hit the artificial barriers to sell a big country that your product is better on. And if we have these examples, even the politicians know that these exist. And then it requires what? To make the court case against that country that you cannot do it. So yes, of course, I think the Commission should be quite strict to help and open and talk for the implementation for these artificial limits that are there. And quite often one has a good idea that why doesn't EU do this and that. Digital signature. It should have been one system for whole Europe since like years. And can you feel it as a normal citizen that you can sign electronically wherever you travel in EU? So this kind of things that they are ready, they are like legislation is there, and the implementation should have been there for years ago. And then I don't know if there's any court case from the Commission against the countries that yes, it's not actually up and running. So these examples are there, and then it's not that much new legislation needed, but then really strict implementation.
Yes, Mr. Koskinen, please.
You draw some parallels from the banking sector, then EU has certainly invested a lot into implementation and enforcement in supervision. So maybe that works as a, not that I'm a big fan of it, but there's one example. What I wanted to say, though, that I would call for simplification of regulation, because you can't enforce and implement something that is so complex that you need an army of lawyers or other advisors to interpret it. So I think that's a challenge within EU right now, that in order for an effective single market to work, the framework for regulation has to be very simple and organized, and then you can start to execute or implement an oversight or supervision of the fulfillment of those regulations.
Mr. Mattila, please.
I do agree with this simplification and really a lot. But one thing is when we talk about digital market and digitalization or telecom market, which I'm very familiar with, we see Europe to advance with the usage and embracing of digitalization with different paces. And when, let's say, regulations or rules are being done for even for the digital world, where there some rules needs to be taking place, they should be more market-driven. That sometimes the mechanism to make the rules is going after the kind of majority rule, and the market is in the first place not going after the majority rule based on how the people have been elected in elections. It's basically the consumers who are deciding or customers deciding in the market, and we get many times wrong legislation in the digital world when the kind of it comes from the political majority instead of market majority. So that's something that needs to be worked out, but enforcing then those practices or rules that have been taking place is of course very vital. For example, our company, we already more than 10 years ago, we created a kind of a Netflix kind of a service to Finland, which is a market leader and is pretty big business in Finland. And then those times, more than 10 years ago, we took a look at that. Can we have that expanded to European countries? Totally impossible. So many different copyright laws and so many different things and this and that it was totally impossible to kind of bring. Then we have Netflix and the other companies coming without any level playing field with us. They basically can come pretty neatly. However, there has been a lot of...
How did they do that?
Well, they kind of are ignoring the rules. Now there has been more work, especially the Vestager has done a great job on creating level playing field. Of course, even in that case, I prefer less regulation also to us and for the outside Europe companies. But nevertheless, level playing field is very important. But what I'm trying to say is about the digitalization, that the market should decide on where to go. And of course, regulation needs to take a look that there's nothing bad happening what the market is deciding, that there are certain boundaries. But nevertheless, innovation is not decided in parliament, it's decided in the market. There are many good things that are decided in the parliament to say, but I mean, in the digital world, the innovations, you cannot know them before people are really starting to use them.
Mr. Koskinen, you have
excellent points. I really echo this, and it reminds me of very important points that I would like to point to our friends on the political lawmaking side. I think what EU has to do is to look at its competitiveness, not only within but also outside. And Madam Minister was talking about artificial intelligence and the importance to cultivate that. And I think she made a statement that the European Union is at the top of this. I claim otherwise. We are actually the laggards. And the problem is that we're so protective of privacy and data that we can't cultivate the oil, the data, in the same way as the bat companies in China. Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and the FATCA, what are they? The US companies, the Netflix and the Apples and the Googles. So in this strive for artificial intelligence development, EU has a challenge, and it's not that I wouldn't support privacy. This is a key competitive factor too, very important too, because when we are mindful of these challenges, create a competitive legislation that is competitive with the other major jurisdictions on the west and the east, then we are creating some big things for the single market.
Very good. The point that Mr. Mattila made on the competition policy and Mrs. Vestager, that has been really a great achievement during the previous mandate. You have concretely seen how EU can enforce its legislation. But on the single market side, more broadly, if the case is about the platform economy, if it's an agricultural national legislation regarding France or Germany or some smaller states, you can clearly see that perhaps the treatment is not the same. Are the big member states and the small member states, do they have the level playing field inside the EU? How do you see it? Please.
Yeah, there we need a strong commission to be brave and look after, and then also different kind of bureaus. We have national bureaus that should then cooperate. For example, on telco business, it got. I just noticed it's even built a different way in different countries, whether it's like independent or is it a part of the political structure, or how is it looking just the market implementation and the rules. And then we create a new system for the European level, then should it be the independent or dependent on the national ones. So yes, of course, in different sectors there are like a variety of the implementations of how to look after the rules. But then I think the main question is that also for IT, is it AI, is it then the platforms? Somewhat, I think that we managed to regulate, and it's opposite to the conservative repeat, no regulation, because sometimes we need to regulate in time and in a European level. Otherwise, there will be bits and pieces, 28 times different one, and then it will be maybe too late. I know the argument, it might be too early, and sometimes, but then that's why we should give the kind of framework. It's more easy on the climate side, for example. With the market share of 22% of the globe, we can say that this is the kind of cars we want for the European market. When we say that in 2025 or 2030 and 2035, we want that in car shops, every third car should be emission-free. Do you think there is no market, the car manufacturers who want to fulfill that market pull? So it is kind of that we have to be also brave to use this market power that we do have. We can say that what we want with this market share of the global world. Like Artioki took in the beginning, that the plastic, banning the plastic, some tools, and now India is doing it. So yes, we can have examples, leading by examples. In the digital world, it's more difficult, but then having no rules at all, and following, and then trying to act too late, and then having 28 different solutions, which is now happening, that yes, one country makes a deal with the Facebook on the hate speech, and then the other one, do they sometimes dare to negotiate with Finland? Or should we also use this market share power to negotiate from the European level, that what is the principles for the democracy, principles for the privacy, and then implement on those principles that we do have some values. We are not China on our privacy values either.
Mrs. Siren, Niinistö and Mattila.
Yeah, I would like to comment on some of the previous what was said before. Just to make one note, my colleagues are saying that I'm a conservative, which is, I mean, true on EPP base, but it feels weird because I'm liberal myself. Yes, but EPP is on the conservative side within the EU and internationally, and I would like to clarify, it's not about no regulation. I mean, of course we need regulation, but it needs to be functional. We need better regulation, simpler regulation. The whole idea of the single market is to help companies succeed, not to build obstacles in their way. And this should be the basic idea on all the regulation that we have regarding businesses and their growth potential. This was actually a very good example from Elisa and the competition from Netflix and others. I worked 2 years on the committee for education and culture, and I was responsible in my group for the copyright question regarding the digital single market, and it's super complicated. It's so complicated that after 2 years, I mean, I still get mixed feelings in my head. But the challenge is to balance between the freedom of usage and the fact that whoever makes the content has to have the share This is the basic idea of the copyright. And now we have a compromise, and we can have another panel on whether it was good or not. Now, new businesses that are born, startups, and the growth potential that we have, it's on the services side. And most companies now, they are already born digital and international. So we should see the regulation already from this perspective.
Yes, indeed. Mr. Niinistö and then Mr. Mattila, please.
Well, I guess in general it's easy to say simplification, yes, and tougher monitoring and controlling of that competition works, yes, but always the devil lies in details, that you need to be certain that you are also that the markets are pushing forwards that kind of a societal change and a future that that reflects our values. And the issue of privacy is there a very tricky one, because there are a lot of fields when it comes to privacy regulation, which actually is good for creating Europe as a place where companies know that this is a safe haven for knowledge as well. That in China it's a government and some of the big companies who get. I mean, the market doesn't work in China in that sense, that you can't rely on that whatever knowledge you have, that you can keep it to yourself, and it's part of your business strategy. Everything is under government control, more or less, what happens there. And in the US, we have a version which is in a sense deregulated in a way where the risk of potential problems comes to individuals, and individuals carry them, and lawsuits carry them. And in Europe, we believe in a system where we have a regulation in place, but less lawsuits and less compensation. We just have to make this system work. So we have to find a way of getting a small enough regulation to make it simple and make it functional, and make it for companies that they know what happens. That it has to be also kind of like reliable in long term. Especially this is important when it comes to climate and energy issues, which I mostly work with, but definitely in digital issues as well. Because you invest a lot of money, you have to rely on you have to be able to rely on the rules. But at the same time, simple enough to make all this possible, but kind of like strong enough to push forward a kind of Europe which we believe in. And that's what we have to address. And I think one big area is also addressing the monopolies, that in the digital world we get these big giants, and European Union is the only one who's actually addressing that issue, and Vestager has been very active in that. That's something which I think is very good, because it's also good for competition that these giants don't create their own kind of like universum where they use all the knowledge that they have into their use. And yeah, we have a strong China and strong American companies, and we are trying to, there in between, to create a fair market and fair regulation.
Yes, gold standard for e-privacy and data protection. We'll see how that functions in the global market. But Mr. Mattila, you had comments here as well.
To my previous talks, I'm not against regulation. I'm just saying that we should have a bit less, maybe, and actually we should be innovating the regulation and how we do regulation in a new way, so that it's more agile and adapted to the pace that is needed in order to be competitive against China or US, because the businesses are created quite quickly. They are created by experimentation, and if we over-regulate and we try to regulate 100% sure everything, it takes first time forever, and secondly, it kills all the innovative ideas in Europe, and that's something that needs to be changed. Otherwise, we are out of business in digital world. US and China, they will move already now much faster. I don't know how it's done in practice. We are 28 or 7 countries, and a lot of regulatory processes already there, but they should be more agile. And to think about, even if I also at the same time ask predictability for regulation, there should be a way of experimenting regulation to say that this is maybe for the time being, and we may change when we learn more how the markets, how the privacy issues are evolving, or how this and that copyright issue is evolving. We will change, and that would be at least a bit more predictable for businesses. Then everybody knows that we are a bit experimenting. But if we are not getting into experimentation mode, we are too slow and we are out of business.
Yes, this is the very, very general problem of the lawmaking, and the EU doesn't make a difference here that it too often goes to micromanaging the end results of the regulation when it should be the enabling framework for the businesses and people to function.
Yeah, it's a short remark that yes, on the business side, do not innovate something that destroys the climate. Do not innovate something that destroys the e-privacy. And if you happen to do so, I'm happy that we can counteract by legislation. And then if it's the global player, it's more difficult, but we should be able to do that. So that's why I said we should have the knowledge that this 500 million market of the consumers is there for the values as well. So when I go to pick the technology business, I said, do not fulfill this directive, the next one. So then you are the first on the market to save the world and the Europe at first date. But then I agree with the Elisa CEO here that because we have the strong regulation for the telcos, then we use that one, and then we do not have the regulation for the Netflix, so then they enter the market without the burden of the regulation that the telcos had. But it was almost impossible to try to make the level playing field. I was part of that legislation last term, so sometimes that we do have the ruling for the banks, and the Chinese ruling is different, so then they are using the AI solutions for the loans that are less than 500,000, and it takes like 5 seconds. That's what I was told the other day. So then we are quite slow to create new kind of digital innovation services on the many traditional sectors, which are quite groundbreaking in Europe. So I would look at the principles and then the ecosystems to create them in Europe.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic to hear the idea of regulating based on principles. And of course, businesses have to be responsible to understand that if we have privacy principle, we cannot be like Facebook seems to be acting that they didn't know or they didn't understand that things can happen. Definitely they did understand. And those businesses who play that bad game against the principle set beforehand should be punished, of course.
Yeah.
But based on the principles to do the regulation, then we could move faster. But then there needs to be some settlement for the ones who are not obeying, and the ones who are, they can move ahead. That's a very, very, very good and valid way, I think.
Mrs. Sirén, please.
Yeah, actually, my main point was already said. I just wanted to say that we need new regulation because what we are regulating now on the digital market didn't exist before. So it also makes sense that we really need to take some time to develop the regulation. When these processes take a long time, and when we have the legislation ready, the market has already changed. The innovations have developed. There are new players, and there are things that we were not able to imagine when actually making the legislation. But you made a very big, good point on the different size of the players. And if I remember correctly, regarding the copyright issue, the regulation is different for small players than as it is for the big ones, just to make it possible for them to grow.
Very good. Mr. Koskinen, last did he comment on this topic? Then
on this topic, I will just say that I'll be blunt to say that I want less regulation in the financial services sector, and I would love actually to you guys to enact a law that says that act in the best interest of the humankind, and then we would take care of the rest.
At this point, I want to ask if there's somebody in the audience who wants to comment or ask a question from our panel. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Jacek Krawczyk. I'm the president of the Employers Group of the European Economic Social Committee, and one comment, one perhaps question. First of all, I like this joke. When there was innovation, the American would say, "How can I make money on this?" The Chinese would say, "How can I copy that?" The EU would say, "How can I regulate?" You think further. I think there are many question marks here. And I think, not go into detail, I think we exaggerate with regulations a great deal. And I think at the end of the day, we are losing. I'm a lawyer, so I like regulation, but in a sort of right context. Second, what I think I have been missing a little bit, you are the moderator, you've touched this twice, the protectionism within the EU. Within the EU, it's growing. The single market with protectionism is something that will never happen. And whether this is about different services, different products, different type of member states, whatever different reasons for that is, it's like, the Chinese torture with one drop repeating itself can kill you in a very painful way. And I think this is something that I'd like also to ask the distinguished MEPs here to pay attention to, because this is growing and it's dividing Europe, dividing businesses in Europe on a very strange basis, which very often makes the business model dead for many enterprises. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mrs. Siren, please.
Yes, I think this is a very important point. We, especially from the perspective of a small country like Finland, who is very, the international trade is very important for us. We are very dependent on it. And we can only be strong if we are strong together, and protectionism is really bad for the basic idea. So we would really need to work towards all the member states to come under the EU flag that we share and work together and take the leadership as the leader of the free world, especially now that Trump is leading US to the opposite way. The US is now focusing on their domestic internal factors. So we should now take the lead as the world leader of freedom and free trade.
Please, Mr. Niinistö.
I definitely agree with you, and I think it's actually, sometimes I said earlier, you said now that Finland as a small country will benefit of having the single market, but also the bigger countries benefit of it. We have to remember also that it's in the interest of the German companies and the French companies, and sometimes this kind of like nationalistic political discussion forgets that there may be one problem with the single market, and if they say the solution is that we create kind of like nag on the single market, create norms nationally which are in violation or at least close to it of the single market, then they think that they protected one interest, but they created 2 or 3 new problems. And this is a political issue which has to be taken into the political debate. So I think it's the council that has to have this discussion, and we MEPs have to be active in that debate as well, that we actually protect the idea of the single market. I think there are 2 kind of threats to that. One is this kind of like norms in small issues, protecting small things everywhere, which amounts to big amounts. And then there is the issue of state aid, export credits, and these which are huge numbers. And that is an area where I think there has to be discussion with the financial world as well. Since 2008, we have regulated the financial world so much that the export credit agencies have taken over a role that was usually done by banks, and that's not very good for the markets either. So we have created an area which is problematic, and this relates to heavy industries.
This is something that Jacek actually referred to the protectionism here, and Mrs. Kumpula-Natri talked about the services sector, and we haven't really touched that.
Yeah.
Whether it is 2/3 or 3/4 of the intra-EU trade, it's the big market, and the most of the jobs are created in the services sector in Europe. However, the most national restrictions are on the free movement on the services, and the member states haven't had really the will nor the capacity to get rid of those restrictions. Of course, this is very sensitive because of the social standards, and the labor laws are always problematic. But how would you go ahead on opening up the services market of the European Union? Please, Mrs.
Well,
Siren.
I would go ahead, and I think the discussion is focusing quite a lot on the negative aspects and the challenges that we really need to work on. But we should actually see the great benefits that deepening the single market to the services would bring to people, to consumers, and to the companies.
Yes,
So, yes.
Mrs. Kumpula-Natri.
Yeah, this is of course the political debate, and then I think that this is overrepresented the employer side here compared to the whole economical forum also. So I want to, as I'm coming from the S&D group, to also say that it was important to reach this agreement on the posted workers, because now we can say that there is also a more balanced way to look at the rules, that you can take out some of the arguments that you don't afford to have the single market. Now that there should be more trusted the single markets, also to see that the employees are treated better, because there were this kind of the feelingness of the inequality. So this is also why I'm the strong speaker for the European Union, that this has balanced, it has rules for the whole single market. So it's not only opening up the markets, but forget all about the rest. So now this has been a more balanced way. And then if you still see that there are like burdens, sometimes it is and quite often it is the big market player who then talks to government to keep the other players out. And there it is also that when the big player wants to be, or is it state-owned or former state-owned, or whatever the market shares are, I think it's fair to say that it should be the balanced regulation, and then it's the best should win. If there is somewhere the product that is better for humankind in another country, so let's welcome that to Finland then. That's consumer choices as well.
Now for the next comment or question from the audience. We had a gentleman over there.
Thank you very much. I'm Jonathan Peel. I'm an Irish citizen who lives and represents the UK. And the only comment I'm going to make on Brexit is that the lunatics seem to have taken over the running of the asylum. I had a question which I put on the Twitter feed for the panel.
Yes, on the circular economy.
On the circular economy.
I had it here.
Right. Basically, we have the intention to move to zero emissions by 2050 and to move to a circular economy. How far does the panel think this will affect trade? Because isn't there a great danger of carbon leakage, whereupon jobs and work is transferred to other places where standards are far lower, GHG emissions are far worse, and in the end, Europe loses out? How can we square that circle?
Mr. Niinistö, please.
Well, this is an issue which I will try to be tackling in the European Parliament, but I think it's a global issue. It's an issue about whole climate and environmental regulation when it comes to Paris Agreement, the continuation of that, and when it comes to European regulation and trade deals and also linkages between different systems. There may be a future in the near future when ETS, European ETS, could be linked with the Chinese ETS or Australian or whatever. There are ideas of trying to create more common systems to avoid leakages there. Still, the science of it, the research insofar shows that there hasn't been that much that kind of like direct carbon leakage, in the sense that industries haven't moved from Europe due to environmental costs. They have moved from Europe due to employment costs or something else, and we consume more products that are produced elsewhere. But this direct leakage hasn't happened in the amount that it's discussed. But we don't want it in the future either. So we have to make sure that Europe goes like one step ahead of the rest of the world, but make sure that they follow one step after. So then we are the leaders of new solutions, and we create markets for ourselves because everybody else comes on board later on. But if they don't come later on board, then we don't solve the climate issue, and then we could get that problem.
Mr. Mattila, please.
Yeah, I could agree a lot what was said by Ville. And I believe that from the business point of view, that most of the businesses throughout the Europe agree that Europe for the first has a great opportunity to be the leading solution provider for circular economy solutions and can lead that. Of course, there are some industries or some companies that may need some transformation or transition periods and that needs to be taken into account, but we need to lead but also see that the others are following, and one way to make it sure is to be absolutely brutal on making sure that the outside EU companies are applying for the rules and complying for the rules that has been set to the businesses in Europe. 22% of the economy can have a vote, and then, like said, it can be then further, and it will certainly further move to the other continents the same kind of habit. I strongly believe, and being part of the Business Europe for 2 years and being in those discussions, I know that it's very widely for the businesses in Europe accepted that we need to take the lead as EU and Europe with this, even if there are some companies which are being hurt a bit more, but they will then be helped and of course adjusting, but it has to be making sure that the other companies coming to Europe to make business, that they are complying with our rules.
Yes, but actually I can also make a claim that the ETS as our main the energy and climate policy tool survived the financial crisis like the euro was under a heavy burden, but we were able to maintain our main policy instrument functional during the euro crisis and financial crisis. So this is something that we need to rely on also in the future. But the problem here regarding the carbon leakage is, of course, that the ETS puts the carbon price, but it's not compatible with the WTO rules. So we can't. They put the carbon tariffs.
WTO has a lot of problems.
Yes,
this is not the only one.
Mrs. Siren, then.
Yeah, and we need to do more. And I fully agree with the previous speakers say. The potential of circular economy on a long term, it needs to be seen as a competitive advantage to whole Europe. And I believe that it will be. In any case, this is something we need to do in terms of negotiating, for example, global climate agreements. If we don't do our share, how can we go to China or to US and say you need to do more if we are not doing ourselves? I love circular economy. I love the idea and the principle. I think we should do everything on the basis of circular economy, and I really believe it's the only and the best possibility we have in saving our world for the next generations.
Mrs. Kumpula-Natri, then Mr. Koskinen, please.
Very directly to your honest question, that what would it happen to the climate goal and to the trade? Everyone should have read the Ursula von der Leyen speech twice or 3 times if we're keen on what will happen, because that was a political compromise of the progressive forces that will work with her. And she said that there is a preparation for the carbon border tax, which I think was a little bit more than possible. So I would, because I was like speaking for the Steel Europe conference just 2 days earlier, and I was there enough to say that possibly Europe should prepare some kind of border adjustment rules or a mechanism, as it's normally we saw the tongue in the middle of your mouth, as in Finnish, kieli keskellä suuta. So she was brave enough to say the tax word, which was like the word F federalist or F word or T word, like a tax word. But yes, this is, if we take it seriously, it has to be reflected to our trade agreements. And now I said that in the parliament there is a strong will that we will not do the trade agreements with the countries who do not respect the Paris Climate Agreement. Sorry to say if it's surprise for someone in the business life in Europe that the parliament majority would forget about the Paris Agreement when it comes to the concrete trade deals. So this is getting tougher, but then it's also that who believes that in China they will eagerly will to have the cars that pollute more than before. No, it's going other way around. And so I'm still the strong believer of the forerunner, the first innovation on the market will take more sphere, but then also this is kind of set by the highest hierarchy person now, so that should also be the signal that we take it seriously.
My modest understanding on the WTO rules and policy making says that to make this happen, actually what the president-elect said is that we need to set the floor price to the ETS to make it WTO compatible with.
That sounds like a good idea.
Well, but
Brits did it.
This implies to that kind of a floor price if we want to have the tax to our borders on carbon. But Mr. Koskinen.
Briefly, don't forget financing and green financing. So those who hold the money, they can contribute in this field a lot, and a bit of a marketing here. So you better check the Nordea asset management portfolio. We have a lot of green products, green financing, green loans, and you name it, we have it.
Oh, you have it. Now two questions from the audience. Mr. Lahti over there, and then gentleman here.
Coming to the financial services, I think in the single market and the one area and where there has been most progress over the last 10 years has actually been in the field of financial services, where a new rule book was created of 60,000 pages, a new supervisor, the world's most powerful bank supervisor, was created, and all of that, well, it was of course in reaction to the financial crisis. But nevertheless, the objective was to also create a fully functioning banking union, a single market for financial products. How do you see that working out? And is it really providing the level playing field and the single market for financial services that it was meant to?
You know where to make me worked up. So this is a very interesting question. First of all, I think and genuinely believe that the intentions were the right back in 2008 and 9, and what was created then was good. It was needed, and what we have today is probably a very well-functioning European banking sector, thanks to all these regulation. But I also think that it's time to have a reassess on this and really consider whether it would be the time to relax a little bit, because 60,000 pages, so there's 60,000 pages of regulatory work for only banks. Now, it's inhuman to know all of this, and I claim that not even the supervisors know all of this. So it's become so complex that actually my concern is that we tend to forget, or we tend to put the attention into the trees and don't see the forest, where this would be so important for the banking sector to survive and go well. If you look at any bank in Europe right now, they're not doing well. They are struggling. So it's not only, of course, of the regulations and the complexity of it. It is the overall situation, so low interest rates and all of that. But I would really invite EU and the politicians to think about this very carefully. Is there something we could do to simplify and relax a bit?
Then there was the question here, please.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you. I come from Portugal. I'm a member of the ESC. My question to you is again about the problem of regulation. As our President Kravchuk said, we, the companies operating in Europe, we know that regulation is the European deal. So when new opportunities appear in the market and new markets are open, we all expect and ask for regulation, because you know that it will come sometime. And the thing is, we are not listened. And when the regulation finally appears, we have been in the market sometimes for years without any regulation. And when that regulation comes, it's to say, you've been doing it all wrong. This raises a problem that was already said by you somehow, that there is a difference in timing between the development of markets and the timing of regulation. And this raises a problem, and this is my question. What do you think about the political decision process in the European Union? Thank you.
Mr. Niinistö, please.
Well, I think if we think about the new spheres of economy, like digital solutions and AI, it would be good, like Mia-Petra said, that the European Union would work so early that we create a common solution from to begin with, that we don't have 27 or 28 separate systems. So in that sense, we have to be faster in regulation, but I'm can definitely agree with that it goes too much into details, and there is the general problem with politicians or whoever. I mean, when people are in a certain position, they feel that this problem that everybody speaks of is best solved at my level. And if everybody thinks that, everybody tries to solve that, everybody puts in their own solutions into the regulation, then it becomes very, very heavy. So there has to be an understanding of regulation being something that creates employment and creates jobs and creates competitiveness, but guides it towards values that we promote. And this should be the deal and nothing more than that. The EU doesn't work like that today. I mean, it's human. It works in the sense that when I was in the Finnish Parliament thought that we want to regulate this. Now I'm in the European Parliament it's our job to regulate it. In the end, both do it, and not in the precisely same way. So we have to tackle that.
Thank you, and then Mrs. Sirén.
Thank you. I don't work in the EU, so I don't know the processes so well, but I can answer on a general level. I think the same thinking goes to all legislation and regulation and norms in general. Why do we have them? It's to protect something or someone. Someone who needs protection, people or the environment, that would not do well if there isn't some kind of regulative tool to help. And these change in time. So there needs to be willingness to go back and see if we need to develop further, if we need to change something, if we need to think something again. And this is why it's a never-ending process. It's politics. About the banking union, if I may just shortly, there is also a process in this. I would agree not to hurry regarding, for example, the talletussuojarahasto. It's the deposit insurance scheme, is it?
Yes.
In English. We need to be sure that the risks are on a right level, so that banks who or the ones who do take care of their own things don't have to pay for the trouble that people who don't take care of their things cause.
Yes,
can I comment? I
please.
just have actually a question on level playing field and a bit to the earlier question here. What is your thing? Because we are sometimes a bit challenging whether level playing field really happens in Europe, and particularly for the smaller countries being there, and now in my case in the financial services sector. But Ville and Mia-Petra, maybe Mrs. Sirén, what's your observation? What are your observations on this level playing field? Is it a reality? Does it happen? I'm sorry I'm taking the moderator's role here, but I would be curious to hear, because we have some question marks.
Yeah, I was for a while a panelist, so you can be the audience. Any comments on it?
No, I want you to specify on the banking sector,
on the
and
banking
then you think that the global
instance,
challengers, yes. Or then that if you are smaller than Nordea, you are not observed that carefully, or which
I'm interested
quarter?
in the banking sector, obviously, but you can expand to other areas too, of course.
I don't know. After the crisis feeling, I think it was important to put the risk inside the banks and not to the outside of the banks. Like the market. Now I mean the public speech. I would say in a minute that it was the risk of the Greece loans with the 17%, and then how we did it, we socialized it, and it's not going to happen anymore after this regulation, which is good because the banks are the private business. They do on the risk, and then they take it inside. So then I'm happy of this regulation. Then of course, as a user of bank accounts, I have to have an account in Belgium and in Finland because I do have the job there. So then I said sometimes that why did you move 10,000 from this bank account to another one? Or why did my assistant paid me $20,000, which was a good question, but it is the visitors program that cannot be paid to me. So then it was paid to my assistant, and then she put it to my account, and then I paid it back to the visitors, the individuals from Finland visiting there. So then I know this is really functioning, the banking laws that yes, there is also there is suspicious question, so something like that is happening. But then I cannot evaluate the level playing field. I know more the IT sector, and then the difficulty is, as I mentioned earlier, that we do have some regulated business, and then we have a new business that is not regulated. And then it blocked the innovation possibilities for the existing companies like the telcos, and it was a bit crazy that just on what category you are put in. So the banking, and then maybe the insurance business, then you have the different regulation. Then when banking goes out from the traditional banking or the digital business come into the banking, then you have again this classical lawyer problem that what sector you are trying to set the laws for the what sector. So the sector by sector legislation is difficult when there are more and more cross-border or multi-sectoral innovations.
Mr. Niinistö, shortly, we are
very
shortly running out of time.
I think the question of rule of law is very important here. If we want to have a level playing field, we will probably never get an exactly level playing field. That has to be the goal of all work that the governments are doing, all governments, regulators, when it comes to the banking union and cooperation between countries. But I mean, there is a the inclination in humanity to, it's easier to understand something which is in your own country with your own language. So there is, level playing field has to be implemented very strongly by regulators also in the banking sector in order to get even close to it. I would say that when it comes to public finances, in the political spheres, issues that are in the political sphere, the big countries do, have different rules than smaller ones. So if France or Germany creates problems with deficit or actually having too much money and not stimulating, they usually get away with it easier than the others.
We have a last comment from the audience.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to thanks for the panel. I'm the member of ESC. I'm from Slovakia. I'm acting on the behalf of Slovak Agriculture and Food Chamber, and in the same time, I'm working also for the neighbor country, for the Czech Republic. So I just one small comment and one wish. Big wish. So the small comment is that from the agri side, so from the side of agriculture and food, it's very important to strengthen external competitiveness of EU and also to increase the internal competitiveness. And we would like to ask for maybe taking care more of the agri sector in the next period, so in the coming period, because now we are discussing the budget, we are discussing common agriculture policy, and as was already mentioned, so trade agreements, and we need trade, but we are a bit afraid of being a victim as an agri sector, as most of you know. So it seems that we need regulation, but we should regulate regulations and to find some kind, something what will work in the practice. So I would like to ask you, and this is the wish, that we should more cooperate. So I would like to ask for the help, the member of the parliament, in the coming weeks and coming months, because we will need to strengthen EU. And now we are preparing different policies for the next period. So once more, thank you very much.
Thank you. The competitiveness of the agri sector, especially. Any comments on this one? Mrs. Sire.
Well, yes, I already mentioned that I love the idea of circular economy and it will save the world. Actually, the creative potential is within agriculture.
Yes. Mr. Minister.
Just to be short, I would like to, agricultural subsidies and benefits and norms actually play a really, really huge role in how that sector develops. And I'm a bit worried that the subsidy system kind of like emphasizes continuation instead of progressive new solutions and exactly. New products. And in that way, we are actually getting a worse agricultural sector in Europe in future, and we are not going to solve global food chain problems or food production problems by that. It doesn't look like it's going so much forward now with the current proposal, so I'm a bit worried. But if we would get a more progressive agricultural policy in place, the subsidies, we could actually get a good basis of having new competitive, productive solutions in markets and also solve the environmental issues. So I think that's an area where we need to continue the discussion.
Yes, thank you very much. The word external competitiveness was mentioned here, and I think that these discussions actually comes down to this in the end of the day. Of course, the Finland's EU presidency is a great opportunity to Finland also to present its view on the future of Europe. We value the peace and stability and rule of law, of course, as the basis for everything. But beyond that, the trade policy and internal market are something that we push forward on the EU agenda. But of course, these are means for something in the end of the day. The EU policy and EU is about making compromises for the greater good. And this is also what the single market is about. We can have 27 excellent regulatory frameworks in our member states, but it's better for all EU and its member states to have one single regulatory framework to be the biggest powerhouse, economic powerhouse in the global sphere in the end of the day. I want to thank you, all the panelists, good questions from the audience, and let's give a big hand for our panelists.
Economic Day will next year here in Turku, and so in between we are putting these ideas on the paper, so kind of a white papers, talking papers, what has happened during these discussions, and we continue building the EU policy in that sense. So ongoing Eurooppa-forum process, like we tend to think. There is also going on a business festival at the same time. For example, there are businesses building new ideas on the circular economy called the Shift, this business festival. we and Elisa are actually hosting a hackathon there where new businesses try to build some solution using 5G against loneliness. So there's huge potential in businesses, but also they are in a regulatory framework, as we have learned today. So a few examples. Some of you are coming with us on the evening boat trip to Ruissalo in the Shift Festival. So the boat is leaving at 7 o'clock from Läntinen Rantakatu 37. So see you there and see you all tomorrow and the day after and the next year. So thank you from our behalf.